you, and thank you firstly all of you for coming. I really appreciate you giving up your time to listen to an old person with new ideas, hopefully. Okay, and Richard and to Annabelle, especially Richard, you've been a lot of effort, and Annabelle, thank you for contacting everybody and letting everybody know that what we're talking about, and hopefully is of interest to you all. So the first thing I'd like to ask, and I'd like it to be a bit more of an interactive kind of arrangement rather than me just give a one-off speech kind of thing. So I'd like to, how do you all feel, by the way? How do you feel about the future of the country? Is anybody positive here? Come on, there must be somebody. Okay. Are you crying? No, I understand. That's a good start. Trying. Yeah, okay. All right. So you're actually positive about the whole future of the country at the moment. Trying. Okay. No, I understand. No, I mean, and do you think it's going to, the way it's going is going to change at all? No. Can you see things changing much?
Yeah.
Black people tell me the same, funny enough, when I talk to them. They see the same. They see just as we see, but they don't necessarily see the same solution. But they are very concerned, and they actually, many of them say to me, well, the next people come in are just going to be just as bad as the last lot. So they're actually quite sort of depressed about the whole thing. And we just need to possibly look at these things a little bit differently, because there is a positive in all this. And the real, to me, the biggest positive is that we're open to new ideas. Because if things were going sort of reasonably okay, I think that we wouldn't get the kind of turnout that we have tonight, for one, and which we appreciate hugely. But it is one of the crossroads that we're talking about, is that we're open to new ideas. So I'm going to break the conversation, I'd like to call it, into 4 parts. The first part is going to be, why do we suggest, why would we think about Cape independence as an option for us? So that's the first thing we look at. Then we look at it and say, is it actually possible? Because many people just actually stop and say, look, it's never impossible, the ANC won't allow it, it's a flood of people coming down the coast, and you're never going to sort it out. So those are sort of general questions which I'd like to leave to the end if we can. So let's go through, why do we say Cape independence? Then we say, can we do it? And what are the mechanisms, and how far have we gone? Because we've been involved in this thing now for about 2.5 years now. So we're a long way from where we started. And then 3, we'll just recap and say, let's say, okay, we think it's a good idea, can be done, and then what are the options? What are the other alternatives? The DA will say, let's have devolution of power. Some people will say, well, let's make it more confederal, which is a weaker central state and a stronger devolved state, very much like the States have got, and Canada and Australia. Look at all those, and then we can say, okay, we've got to beyond that, we can look at the practical steps that we have to take now, because there are some real practical steps that we need to take from our point of view. We're part of, I don't know if you know, but we're CIAG, which is a Cape Independence Advocacy Group. It was formed in 2019, I think. And Tessa's here, we joined in just before lockdown, I think March 2020, I don't know about that, 2020. So we've been involved in it. We have a big executive committee which includes black people, includes colored people, includes all sorts of people, so it's a whole cross section. Okay, so let's, and then at the end of each section, let's try and just analyze that section together and get questions from you rather than to do it all at the end. So let's look and say, why would we think Cape independence is an option? A lot of us feel emotionally that's not a bad idea, but what is the actual logic behind it? I think we also got to just take one step back, if I can, just before we do that, is to say, what are we wanting from our country? What are we looking for? Can I throw something out to you, so we can debate it quickly? When I walk around the Cape and we talk in various different places, the first thing people say to me, they want safety. That's the very first thing they want. Number 2, they want a great future for themselves. And then the third thing they're after is a great future for their children. Here, not anywhere else. Is there anybody else who thinks we need something else other than that? And we know medicine, we know all the other things, but in general, as an overview thing.
Competent government.
Yeah, absolutely. We need that. We definitely need that. We can talk about that side. Anything else?
Things that work.
Okay. You're better off here in the Western Cape. We're much better off, as you know, for the rest.
I think the breakdown of the rule of law is a huge problem.
Massive issue. Yeah, it is. The whole corruption of the whole judicial system is a real problem. And I mean, I hear some horrific stories where business people don't go to court often on big things anymore. They sort it out themselves in a very much more rough way than we would like it to happen. Okay, so all right, so we agreed that that's really what we want. As an overall view, we would like to be safe. We would like to have a good future for ourselves and a very, very good future for our children. And there isn't a race group in the Western Cape that doesn't feel that, as far as I can find. We all want the same thing. We might want different ways of getting there. And we're, generally speaking, not very logical in a lot of these things. We're very emotional about it all. Okay, so let's look at, is there a difference between the Western Cape and the rest of the country? And I like to try and break it down because we're talking a political difference now. We like to break it down into an easily understood thing. The Western Cape's got a history, an electoral history that's gone back probably 20 years now. I think it's 1998 was the last time the ANC were I think they had 44% at one stage. They're now down to about 18% in the Western Cape in voting. So we have voted, really, if you just break it all down again, we have voted for, and consistently over many, many years now, for what we would call a sort of a democratic version of an African Singapore. That's really what that's how we voted in the last many, many years, probably 20 odd years and more. And the rest of the country has continually voted for an African Cuba. If you're really trying to break it down, why do we want Singapore? Well, what's the great thing about Singapore? It's not only Singapore, it's also Taiwan, South Korea. What they managed to do in one generation is take a poor group of people and make them all at least middle class in one generation. That's in fact what we've been voting for all this time. We can't do it because the rest of the country votes differently, and they control most of what happens. And Cuba is a very thin layer of very wealthy people, and the rest of the people are poor and underemployed, etc., etc. And that is the way we're heading. There's no doubt. It seems to be. Many times people talk about Cuba as a real option. I mean, this woman who died recently.
I think we're there.
Okay, but not here. Not funny enough. I don't think so much here, but in the rest of the country, yes. No, there's certainly lots of evidence of that. We have the unemployment here, though. We still have the same unemployment like Cuba. Okay, so that's a really big difference between us. Is that we ideologically are very different from the rest of the country. And if you look at countries that are split over in the past, I mean, Norway split from Sweden. I don't know if you will know that, about 100 years ago or so. And they split on foreign policy, trading policy actually. Norway wanted to trade with the rest of the world, and Sweden, because it was close to Germany, wanted to trade with a closed area, and they split on that version. So our differences are really fundamental. There's no superficial difference between us and the rest of the country when we talk ideologically. Okay, so if we're talking independence, we have a very good reason to do it because we are so different ideologically. But we are at a crossroads, and there are three things that are affecting us at the moment. And one of the things on the crossroads, which is great, is that we are open to new ideas, and that's very important. If we wouldn't be able to do all this or talk about these things. And the second thing on the crossroads is that there's a change. The Western Cape is changing very fast. If I break it down to the whole racial situation, we have at the moment, we don't actually have a racial absolute majority in the Western Cape. There's nobody who's a majority. There are 3.2 million coloured people as the beginning of last year. There are 2.8 million black people in the Western Cape, and there are 800,000 white people. That's as it sits at the moment. But that is changing at 100,000 people a year. So every 10 years, another million people coming from the Eastern Cape, and they are going to change us because they're coming with two things that will affect us. One is they're generally poor. So when we talk about how do we uplift people, how do we create the Singapore, which is what we're trying to suggest, we actually can do it. This influx of people is going to be very difficult for us. They're coming in all wanting all the basic services and not giving us much in the way of tax to help us. So, and that's a million people every 10 years. So it's 10 years ago, there's a million people come in. And that you give 15 years, that's nearly 1.5 million people changes us the structure and the ideological thing is going to change in the Western Cape if that continues. It's one of the fundamental things that we say that independence is most important for us, because that is the only way we can stop it. There is no other solution to stopping that influx of people.
I mean, sorry, just a
Yeah.
question. Are you proposing that a vote is going to change that? And that
Sorry?
vote is going to be allowed
Sorry? A vote?
to change the Western Cape or secede?
Okay, that's a big question. So can I do it at the end? And it's a very important question. Yeah, I'll tell you at the end. So if you talk, is there a reason for the Western Cape to be independent? And those are the reasons I would suggest that the two parts. We're open to suggestions. We have also got a demographic change, so we've got a window of opportunity if we're going to do this. We can't do it. We don't have it it's not very long. Maybe 5 years is possibly an outside thing. Otherwise, it's going to really change, and we're going to come up with a very big ideological thing and a big financial issue that's coming up. I'm just trying to so on the reason for independence. The third thing, we have a great opportunity. We have a really huge opportunity in the Western Cape. If we create this Singapore, this democratic version of an African Singapore, and there are three major worldwide things that we can take advantage of as an independent Cape. Number one is that we are becoming one of the great tech areas in the world. It's one of the centers. I don't know if you know the Western Cape. The Western Cape, I'm talking about Cape Town to Stellenbosch is where that also is growing. You see this thing about Amazon, and Amazon is the single biggest, right now, even before they built the headquarters, they're the single biggest employer, private employer in the Western Cape, and they're growing fast. And they're doing Amazon Web Services, so it's not stuff that they're doing for us. So this tech thing is growing. I know my daughter's involved in it, and that the same kind of growth. The second thing we have an opportunity on is the green economy. The green economy, the first world is going green in lots of ways, and we have a lot of things that we can do. I don't know if you know, there's a lot of green hydrogen, there's a lot of green hydrogen being done, and there's lots of other things. And the third, which I think is even the biggest one, is Africa is changing as a continent very fast. It's going from, it's got 1,000 million people now, when they can count them everybody, but it's going to about 2,000 million people in the next 30 to 40 years. So it's doubling its population in the next 30, 40 years. And very few other places are doing. India's changing a bit, China's going down, and that is a massive opportunity, because if you think of all these international companies, where would they want to headquarter their African operations? We have an opportunity to put them in the Cape. At the moment they're talking Kigali and in Rwanda, and the other is Nairobi. But if we get it right here, we have this huge growth thing that are these three things that we can take advantage of. So we're going to grow this Singapore, very democratic Singapore we want, not such an authoritarian one as they have there, or had there, it's a little bit less so now. So that's the opportunity for us to become, if we do become independent. So just on the idea of independence, anybody got any questions or any, I think just on whether it's a good idea, we won't look at the problems just yet, but we'll look at those later. We can. Does anybody not think it's a good idea if we can do this?
How does one define the borders?
Well, it's relatively easy to define the borders because they're actually defined for us already.
How do you stop the influx?
No, we understand. That's a big question again, and we do understand that. And it's a question, if you mind, I can leave it at the end. But it is a very big question, that, and the other, it's going to be, is the ANC going to stop us, etc., etc. Okay, any other things on whether it's a good idea?
It's a great idea.
Very good idea.
It's a good idea. That's a great idea. It's a great idea.
Sorry, I don't want to be the...
No, please do.
But just
Yeah.
a simple question. What is the relevance of it?
What's that?
Of this independent Cape? Because I think what you mentioned technology, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you look at why there were borders, and if you go back in history, what is the relevance of a border in history? If you go back 1,000 years to now, we had geographic borders. We talk about the relevance of a head office, and we talk about the relevance. I mean, Amazon Web Services setting up essentially a cloud-based solution, putting able to provide services to be connected on a recurring basis. It doesn't necessarily employ people. It's not really whatever. But what is the relevance in the past, specifically for a geographic area from a political perspective? What defines it? What holds it? What's the basis of it?
Well, I would have think it's a way of thinking, is it not, to a large degree? If you've got a border like that, you would say, look, within there, this is how we feel. England is, okay, it's easy when you've got a sea, but England has a way of doing things, and we need a different way of doing things in the Western Cape. Actually, we actually already have a different way of doing it. We just want to say we just need to cement that.
Sure, and within that, by having a way of doing things, there's got to be a control mechanism.
Yeah, sure. Understand that.
So throughout history, what is the basic control mechanism to keep domestic policy in place to maintain anything? What has that been?
In the Western.
It's been what? And the police force.
Yeah.
Well,
so what we're saying is, and the relevance of the geographic point of the boundary is to have a point that you have a control mechanism that puts it into the police force and not, right? So how do we see
that being controlled?
Police force in the next 20 years or 30 years? Do you see it as something that is a function of people standing there? Do you see border gates?
No. Well, there'll be border gates, certainly. Can I, do you mind, because that's also another big question. Do you mind if I leave it to the end? We'll be on possibly focus on that when we need to go through the steps first, if we can. But it's a very important question, and it comes up often, and we do understand it. It is a problem either way, of course. But just talking about the idea, assuming we can do it. So does anybody feel it's not a good idea?
What is the financial?
Yeah, would it be economically
Viable, yeah. Okay. I'm also going to leave that to the end of it as well if I can, because it's also another big question. Because we need to go through these steps first, if you don't mind. Okay, and I'll go through that. It's a very important question, and we've got facts and figures on what the situation is with our taxes and how we are going to do it. Okay. Any other goodie? Right. So let's go on to the steps that we have to do. So there are standard steps that you have to do, and if we're going to change the politics of the Western Cape, which is in effect what we have to do, and it's a fairly standard process that you have to follow. You have to and what is in our favour already at the moment? We have Section 235 in our Constitution, which is based on international law, gives us the right to self-determination. Okay, so that's a very, very important thing that we have in our favour if we want to do this thing. So we have the right, both in international law and in African law, actually, in African Union law, and in international law, we have the right to self-determination. We don't have the right to secession. Nobody has the right to secede from a country. What we do have is this right to self-determination. When the right to secession comes in, is if your self-determination is denied. So you apply for self-determination, and we'll talk about how you do that, and then if you don't get it, then you have the right in international law to go and secede from the country. So that's the process that we're on at the moment. And how do you determine what is self-determination? Each country is not defined, but how do you determine each country? You do it through referendum. That's how it's done. Scotland had its referendum, Quebec's had referendums, Spain didn't have a referendum, or they tried a referendum, but they did something different. So in those referendums, you have to win those referendums by a 50% plus one vote. 50% plus one. It's not a super majority, nothing like that. It's just 50% plus one. The other thing that's in our favour is our Constitution, wisely drawn in certain instances, gives the Premier of the Western Cape, only the Premier of the Western Cape, the right to call a referendum. Cyril Ramaphosa can't call a referendum in the Western Cape. Only our Premier can call that.
What's the DA's policy on that?
No, well, the DA has already agreed to call the referendum. Okay, so this is part of what we've been doing. So the last 2.5 years started in a fairly fraught discussions, but now they're actually keen on the referendums. They're actually very keen. They like the idea of using the referendum as a mechanism for a different reason than we wanted, but they have agreed to call this referendum. And on top of that, the other thing we have is they've agreed to put a question on independence in that referendum. So it'll probably be like a 7 or 8 question thing. Do you want the police? Do you want to be separately taxed? All these kind of things. And there's going to be a question on independence. And that was our negotiations to try and move the DA from where they were. And the reason they actually did that is because our polling, which we've done a couple of polls now, our polling showed that 65% of the DA voters in the Western Cape want independence, but they want the DA to run it once it is independent. It's very clear. The polls show it's very, very clear. And the DA was shocked that their own voters, their own people, said they had to move from where they were. And I mean, I must admit, they've done whatever we've asked, we've worked with them on. They really have done things. It's taken a long time to persuade them, but we never call the word persuade. We rather say discuss it with them. And they now are fully on board on the idea of the referendum. So we're already a long way, because the referendum is the issue. That gives you the moral high ground. We need the moral high ground, because then they have to say they can say, no, you can't have those things. But we want the DA to do other things as well. But that's still under discussion at the moment. So, what the question on a referendum? We know from our polling that we're heading towards. The polling shows us that we're heading towards a 60-40 split. We're not there yet, but we're heading towards a 60-40 split pro-independence. So 60% people are wanting independence, and about 40% don't want it. You break it down racial groups, white people are about 70% pro-independence and 30% against. The coloured group don't really know a lot about this at the moment. We have to get out there. It's our job to get out, which is one of the reasons we need to talk to you about these things. The coloured group, once they know, and our people on the ground are showing that they go 90% almost towards independence. They feel they've been getting a short stick. And they have been getting a short stick. Absolutely, yeah. Okay. Black people also realize they're getting a short stick too, eh? Okay. So, and black people are about 20% pro-independence. That's what our polling shows. And it seems to split in two groups: the top end of people and the bottom end. The people who are unemployed don't see any future for themselves or their children. And we've got to build this. This is one of the very important things we have to do. So those are the steps we have to take. The DA is on board. We've got all the steps we have to do. We're on our way to a referendum. We hope it's going to be sort of towards the end of next year. That's where we'll be, and all we have to do is vote. Once we're in that position, then we can start negotiating with whoever's going to be in government at that time. It might be a combination of the DA, we don't know. It might be ANC and some other group. There are three options that we see. But on those steps, you want any questions on those particular steps that are already in place at the moment? Can I get some water while I'm...
Solution be a federal system?
Well, that's the option that...
Or would it be complete independence and secession?
Okay, in our case it would be complete secession.
Secession?
Yeah, federation, federal system.
Does it work financially?
Yeah, I'll give that to you now, okay. So the situation we have at the moment, excuse me, sorry, is we are taxed, we actually have a federal system at the moment. It's a very weak federal system, but it's still a federal system. We have a premier, we have boundaries, all that is already in place. What the DA want is us to be the more devolved power. But if you look at the financial aspect, that all the advisors, financial advisors that we've spoken to say there are only two provinces that have the financial might to become independent, the Western Cape and Gauteng are the two. From our taxes point of view, last year, which was a bad year for the Western Cape because we had COVID and our tourism industry was hammered, a lot of our exports our fruit exports were a problem as well. We generated about 10% of the national GDP last year in a bad year. We vary between 10 and 15% of the GDP. Taxes, we paid 1,500 billion in taxes to the central government. Sorry, not talking about 150 billion was our taxes to the central government, of which 50 billion came back to us to run the Western Cape. The other 100 billion, there was a grant, but the other 100 billion was spent on our behalf by central government. So that's how weak our federal system is at the moment. 50 billion was given to us, and 100. So we paid 100. So all of our taxes went straight to central government. They paid back 50 billion, and for the Western Cape government to use, and 100 billion they spent on our behalf. Okay, so that would change, and we know how well they spend our money. So there's an issue. From an economy point of view, we're the size of England. The Western Cape is the size of England, not Great Britain, but England. England has something like 40 million people, I think, living in England. Our economy is bigger than the combined economies of Namibia, Botswana and Zimbabwe together, the three independent countries, so they can be independent, we also can be independent, and that's hobbled by the government, because we're hobbled on many sides. So that's the financial aspect. Let's look at just going back to, can we create a Singapore here? I don't know if you know, Singapore walks around telling the whole world what they actually did. And there were three main things that they did, which took their poor little fishing island that they had, and in one generation they had made themselves an amazing powerhouse in the world with 7 million people, the same number of people as we have. So they have 3 rules, and those, and you'll see when we actually talk the 5 rules that are important, we only follow 1 in this country. First rule, no corruption, and you start at the top. You have a special court, you just deal with people quickly, because you cannot spend 20 years sending somebody to jail. It just loses its effectiveness. You have to do it quickly. Number 2, which is an interesting one actually, because they say you mustn't govern with an ideology. As soon as you govern with an ideology, 2 things happen. You forget your goal is to make everybody middle class. In a 30 to 40 years, that's what our goal is to do. And if you start taking an ideology and saying, we've got to do it this way, we've got to do it that way, we just do what works. That's all they recommend on that side. And number 3, you have to have the very best person in the job, always. So this idea of, you can fast track, I mean, I think that what the Conservative Party are doing in England on race has been quite good. They are fast tracking certain people, I think we have to do that. But you cannot have anybody other than the best people in the job. They've got to be selected by the people around them. You can help people and fast track them, but you cannot say 28% must be white or black or Xhosa or whatever it is. You just got to have the best people, otherwise it demoralizes everybody. That's the thing behind it all. And then I would add two more things. So that's their 3 things, going back to the now. No corruption, no ideology, we just do what works. And number 3 is best person for the job. We would add world-class education on all fields. That means we need world-class plumbers, electricians, everything has to be, if we're going to do this thing in 30 years, we need world-class education. And it's not that complicated. It's not expensive, not that expensive. You record the best people. And you then spread it amongst the schools. You don't have to have every teacher made the best in the world. It doesn't have to be like that, not anymore with technology. And then the other thing we have to do is we have to fast track. We've got to understand that we come from very different backgrounds. I talked to Zietler, who's a constitutional lawyer who's coming from KZN to join us in the Western Cape. He needs us to understand that he has a very different upbringing, and he's got some things that he's angry about, and I understand that. So we've got to fast track people, but we still need to employ the top people. We cannot do it on a racial basis. We have to, if we're going to build this thing. We have to get away. Firstly, we want to build it away from race. So that's why the Singapore idea is what we can use as just a goal for us all. Because if we achieve it, I don't know how would you feel if you were part of this growth into a Singapore here in the Western Cape? Did you? No, that's what I feel.
You're going to be 98. How do you enjoy it?
Yeah. No, well, look, there's nobody else who's done it faster than that. Those 3 countries have done it very, very fast indeed. China's a different, we can't use China as an example. 1,300 million people, authoritarian society, we're not like that. Those are reasons they were authoritarian, those 3 countries were fairly authoritarian, a little bit less so nowadays, quite a lot less so now. But those are good examples, it's not complicated stuff, eh?
How would the electoral process work?
Well, okay, so that's for the government that we elect. There's going to have to be a constitutional assembly, as happened last time, to decide what kind of constitution we want. We've got Martin van Staden's in the process of drawing one at the moment as an example for people to use, learning some of the big mistakes we've made in our present constitution. Okay, so does anybody feel that wouldn't be a worthwhile thing and get us over race? How do we get over race?
Sorry.
Yeah.
When you
Sorry.
say, it's not complicated.
Those 5 things are not complicated.
Not complicated in understanding the concept
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
you have the right people
Sorry?
You've got no corruption.
No corruption, no ideology.
Yeah.
You've got to have the best people in every job.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We have to have world-class education.
Yeah.
Those are all things that we can achieve.
Yeah. So those are all things we can achieve, and that's not complicated.
Not in 30 to 40 years, no. And I talk to black people, and I say to them, and they understand this. And guys, the basic thing, they understand that if they were educated, they would be pretty well on the way to middle class. They're not going to go back to school again, but they certainly want their children to be educated, and that's the way we can do it. It's through a world-class education. We can just literally take that group of children reasonably quickly, and we can get it going.
So just as a matter of interest, if we took just practically, because those concepts are, I don't think there's anyone in the world that would disagree with those concepts, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So what I found is that all those concepts are sound and 100%, but let's just get really practical and basic.
Mm-hmm.
So if you took the Bito area here, there are a bunch of schools here.
Yeah.
And in those schools there are a bunch of teachers.
Yeah.
So there's your education foundation, from primary school system to the middle school system.
Yeah.
So if you just had to walk in, do nothing else in the world, okay, and walk into Bito right now and say, right, let's just do a census on the quality of education in Bito, and you looked at these teachers, do you suggest that from a Singaporean perspective, that walk in and set a bar and say, this is the level you've got to be at in terms of maths literacy, this is where you'd have to be with respect to that. So would the concept be you would walk into whatever school, walk in there and say, I'm sorry, we've got 300 teachers here in this area, and 160 of them don't actually qualify. In fact, we don't need 300 because the budget's not looking great. So how would you transition those teachers out of the system within the next 5 years? And what would be the social results of that? And how would that not be complicated?
Those practical things are going to be an issue we have to deal with. That's why we've got to say, that's why we've got to forget about an ideology. We've got to say, this is where we want to get. We want to do it in 30 to 40 years. How do we do it in a way that, firstly, gets us re-elected? Any government has to be re-elected every 5 years. So it's not going to just chuck out a whole lot of people. They have to find ways of doing this. If other countries can do it, why the hell can we not do it?
Sure, I'm not talking about ideology. I'm just talking about, forget about the principles of politics or anything. Let's assume we are an independent state today.
Okay.
Let's assume you are now in charge of this independent state, whatever it might be. Let's just get micros. Let's start in Bito. We all agree with it, it's great. What we now know, in our current scenario, we can give you 20 issues from law enforcement, municipal, waste reticulation, education, the whole lot. What would you do with the current people that are doing this that would be considered not par for the course with respect to doing it? How would you transition that in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, firstly, I'm not an educational expert on this particular issue, but I cannot see how, if other people can do it, we can't do it. We've got all this technology that we have around. Why can we not take people back and educate them? Teachers, our biggest problem sits with the teachers' unions. In fact, the unions are one of our biggest problems in the country because they resist all these changes. And we have to break that power of the unions. We cannot have them as powerful as they are. They control in many ways government. So I cannot see. I don't know the details of it. I'm going to talk to an educationist and we'll solve it. But if we understand that's where we want to be, why do we need to look at all the problems that we will get there? We will get there in 30. I would say it's probably going to take us 10 years to do that transition, change everything. But within 10 years, with sufficient will, we can do these kind of things. I can't see any problem with that. Sorry, so we're just talking about Singapore. So the idea of Singapore, is that something that will get us over this whole racial things that we never seem to get away from? I'm reading a book on Milner. It was the same problem 100 years ago. This was just between the white and the Afrikaans and the English. Then it went to Afrikaans, English, and Afrikaans and black people. Now it's black people. We have issues over that now. We have to get over race, and the only way we're going to get over race is by having an ideal that we're striving to get, which makes us all excited. And we have the community numbers right now. Right now in the Western Cape, there's nobody who dominates the Western Cape. There's no ideology that can, other than the ideology we know dominates, but there's no single group that can actually say that's the way it's going to be. Otherwise, politicians just look for the easiest way of doing it, as they do in this country. They say, you would discriminate, if you're a black person, two things. Black nationalism we want and socialism. You will discriminate against, we will discriminate on your behalf. And I understand that. I mean, I understand it's a very simple way of selling things, but it's wrong for us. It's wrong for us. We need to get beyond that. So I'm suggesting that this goal, if we can all get behind, if we think that's something we can all get behind. I know when I talk to people unemployed, we've got an unemployed group on our EXCO committee, and that's what excites them, the idea that this unemployment that they have and they see for their children coming into the future will change. And they know education is going to do that. So we have to find the solution. Whatever the solution is going to be, we'll find the solution. We're creative enough. We've got all technology. There's nothing that we should say we're not going to be able to do it. There are practical problems, and there are going to be issues. The people are going to go on strike, and there are going to be issues. But let's have that as where we want to go. We won't be absolutely perfect on it, but we'll be a long way further than we are at the moment. Okay, so is that a worthwhile goal for us?
Absolutely.
Is it? Okay, no, that's great. Okay, so let's look at the alternatives before we come back to some other questions. The DA doesn't want us to go that far, as you probably all know. They want the federal system to be more devolved. If you talk to, there's obviously a public persona of the DA. There's a different, in many cases, than people we talk to, but the DA has a problem, and that 2/3 of their voters are out of the Western Cape. Only 1/3 are in the Western Cape. So every time we discuss anything, and they say it's a good idea, great idea, but then they say the voters out of the Western Cape won't like that idea. And I understand that. They would like us to be in the same trouble as they are. But why should we? We've got to end up looking after. We've got to look after our own families, and we've got to look after the people that are in the Western Cape. That's the way I view it, and that's the way we as an organisation view it. Okay, so if you look at devolution is really asking national government for more power. That's what it really means. And they have been doing it for 20 years. They've been asking the government for 20 years for power, and the government, I think every minister that's got it has got a desk full of papers that he never gets to, and when he does get to it, he gets changed and a new minister comes in and we've got to start all over again. So the DA has not got any things. There's a possibility of them getting some more, generating their own power, and that's happened. Since we started to put pressure, us, and not only us, the Freedom Front, a lot of other people putting pressure on, the DA has got a bit more militant on this, and they're now pushing for police. Jordan Hill-Lewis is pushing strongly for police, and these are all part of the pressure that we need to put on them. They do have a mechanism to do it much more strongly, because we're saying to the DA, if you want devolution, do it with you. The government's not going to give it to you. They've proven over 20 years they're not going to give it to you. You've got to threaten them with something worse. Otherwise, they're just not going to do it. And we have it in Durban with them on the 13th of September to try to find a wording that they would accept. So devolution, and the two problems with devolution that we would look at, and the DA are aware of this. Don't worry, they're fully aware of this. One is you don't stop the migration of people coming through if you're devolved. So once you've devolved this million people that's coming every 10 years, it's going to continue. And you're going to have what the rest of the country is ideologically, but the rest of the country will eventually migrate down to here. And there is, from what we can see, no change in ideology. You talk to African people about socialism and black nationalism, they're still fundamentally on that. They like the idea of education, but the ideology is not changing. And in the last election, I think we had the ANC were 48% and the EFF were around about 11 or 12%. So there's still 60% in the same ideology. So that ideology is coming down, and we need to realize that ideology, with devolution, we're not going to stop that. So that's going to happen. What's happened, the rest of the country will eventually start to move down here in ideology. The other problem with devolution is what Spain went through, in that if you ask for things from government, you get them, they also can take them away from you. And that's exactly what happened in Spain. In 2006, they were trying to deal with Catalonia and the problems with Catalonia and the Basque country and the Basque wanting to be independent. They said, okay, the way to solve it is we'll give you devolution. So they devolved all the powers to Catalonia, and then 4 years later they took them away again. And that's never resolved the issue in Catalonia because of that particular thing. Okay, so that's the problem with devolution. And the DA wants you to go that route because it's in the best interest, in their view, of the DA, of two-thirds voters. I mean, I'm a DA supporter. I've supported them for years. But I understand the dilemma that they sit with. There's two-thirds voters, and they can't follow the one-third in what they want. So I feel that we will lose those powers because there is an authoritarian thing in this country. It's a long history and it's a very authoritarian history. So the idea of giving us powers to be a democratic and keeping those powers is probably dim. Okay, well, so that's the problem with devolution. So how do you solve that? Can you solve that within the unitary country? And that we call it confederalism, is where you change the constitution. Because otherwise the party that's 51% or 50% plus one will then determine whether you keep those devolved powers in devolution. In confederalism, it becomes a very weak state. Firstly, I don't think that will happen. A very weak central state, and we get lots of powers, as you do in America. America, the states have a lot of powers. You talk to Americans, they say they don't ever deal with central government. It's all done locally. The trouble with confederalism, and it sounds a nice idea to change the constitution to do that, but to change the constitution, you need a two-thirds majority in parliament, and you need 6 out of 9 provinces to do it. So it's a huge hurdle if the DA wants to take devolution and actually entrench it in the constitution, because that is the only safety that you have. But you're also still you're never going to reintroduce a Dompas and say people in the Eastern Cape can't come down or people from other places can't come down. And the other problem with devolution is if you devolve power to the Western Cape and you create this economy that we're talking about in the Western Cape, and you don't have closed borders, people are just going to come at a greater rate than they are at the moment. As has happened from Zimbabwe and everything else. So we have to close our borders. Sorry. Yeah.
If you go to the vote,
yeah,
and surely the same thing's going to happen as in the past. There are thousands upon thousands of people, and you've got to get a 50 plus 1% vote.
Yeah. Of registered voters.
Of registered voters.
Registered voters, yeah.
But aren't we getting a bit ahead of this whole thing now? Because firstly, to exercise 265, is it?
235, yeah.
235?
Yep.
Surely you're going to get a hell of a lot of opposition from the ANC. They're going to try everything in their power to stop this. What chance have you got even to go to the vote?
Well, the Premier can call the vote. So there's some technical issues we have to sort out, which we're doing at the moment. But the Premier calls the vote, not the DA, not the ANC. Okay, so that's already in our constitution. Both in the Western Cape Constitution, which has got a separate constitution, and our own, and the national constitution, is that premiers are the only people with the right to call that. So we don't have to go to the ANC and ask them to call the vote.
So
they might have to run it.
It's a vote on devolution, not secession.
Well, it's not. It's a vote on self-determination. It's not on secession. Secession kicks in if you don't get the. Once you voted on all these things, and then you go to the government and say, look, these are things we democratically asked for, and please can you give us those powers? And they say no. That's what triggers the right in international law to secede. So you've got to ask for these things first.
Yeah,
so we've got to win this thing first, and then you go and ask for them. Okay, and we've got to do this thing. We've got to do this thing correctly. We cannot do it on a. We just like the idea, and there's a poll that says you've got 50 or 60%. You can't do that. You've got to do a proper election, which is what we've been doing. And the DA is 100% on board on that, by the way. They don't have any objections to us to running a referendum. In fact, they're very keen on the referendum. They just don't like the last question. Okay, but they've agreed to put it in. So, and then once we've got it, the DA is in a position now So that we've now got a majority that wants independence. Let's assume that's the way we go. Majority wants independence. Then the DA is not going to turn around and say, look, I'm sorry, we're not, if they're sharing power at that stage. They're a democratic organization, I would say that for them. They believe in it, they've said we have the right, the Western Cape people have the right, they've said that publicly. We have the right to do it. COPA said that, ACDP has said that. And if you look at the debates that are going on, you'll see how the ANC is already changing from where it was, say, 6 months ago. They're just losing the argument. And that's why there's one great thing about the country is that we can actually debate these things. We can argue them. We argue them on social media. There are many things that we're doing that help there. Sorry. So does anybody? Okay. So you see. So we like the idea of being independent. We don't want, or we agree that devolution has a problem for us. It has a big problem for us. Would we be happy with that? Not so happy. Okay. And then
I don't quite understand it.
What the difference between devolution?
It's very. I mean, I'm to be quite honest. I just don't understand.
What the devolution?
Devolution.
Oh.
I mean, what is it in a nutshell? Devolution.
Okay. Yeah.
I think he to give you the police, and he says, go away.
Ask him
The
to give it.
devolution is more power.
Oh,
Okay, so you're basically breaking up the structure of the police. You have your own police force, your own.
In effect, yeah. We do. Sorry, I should have explained that.
So I just quite like that.
So we have a federal constitution. We have a premier. We have boundaries. We have a proper federal constitution. We don't have any powers. We have too few powers. We can look after education to some degree, but we have to employ on certain bases. We do at the hospitals. We do those sort of things. But the things that really matter is we don't tax ourselves, which gives us the independence to do things. That's one of the things that we don't do. And these are the things that the government the DA is trying to. They've added independent taxation. That's to this. Referendum. So the right to tax us separately from the national government is part of this referendum that's going to come up.
But how are they going to feel about giving up 100 billion?
Who's that? The DA? No, we understand, and that's a question I will come to just now. Okay, so let's. So do you see what I mean by devolution?
Yeah,
so you're taking some powers, you're giving more powers.
What you're saying is we do have a hospital here.
Yeah.
Okay, and we have another one in George. And
Yeah.
We do have a school here. And we do have a police station.
Yeah.
But at a central point, we don't determine how they run. We
You
don't
do?
have a way
Yeah.
to determine how they run. They run by central government.
Well, the West,
Yeah.
the hospital stuff, we do have a reasonable amount of devolved power. But the things that really matter, which is taxation, the national policies, about BEE, all those kind of things, which are a problem for us, and being able to really make it attractive for people to come and work here. If we want Amazon here, we have to make it good for Amazon to be here. People must be able to come from America and get a visa to come here and work in a week, like Canada does. They don't want anybody to come and work here. Those are the things that are really hobbling us with this great future that we sit in front. So Amazon's going to say, well, look, I'll have a small office there and I'll probably put a bigger one in Nairobi where I don't have to have that problem. So we want to grow fast. We have to be free of all these things. And those are what the DA and we agree on all that. So we want all those powers devolved down. The problem for us, as I go back to that devolved power, is they can be taken, whatever's given to you can also be taken away. Anybody with a 50% plus one will just can take those powers at any stage they want to. So if you want to put them into the constitution, you've got this huge constitutional hurdle if you want to do it. If you're going back to the idea, you've got to give 2/3 majority in parliament, and you've got 6 out of 9 provinces to do it. Okay, are we on board about the whole thing? Okay, no. Anybody else got any queries on those?
I just want to know what would be the win for the rest of the country to let the Cape go? Like what's in their interest to let it go?
Well, that's the DA's situation. There's 2/3 and they say that's a problem, and we understand that's a problem. But you don't have to go to the national government and ask them. You can negotiate it, but you don't say to them, we want a constitutional amendment for us to leave. Okay, it doesn't work like that. It works on international law. International law says if you've done the democratic thing, you've asked for all these powers, and you've asked for independence, then you go and negotiate with government. And from the government's point of view, is the biggest single thing in our negotiation. Two, they don't have the power to stop us to do it. They don't have the military power to do it, to come and just occupy the place and try and run the place on our behalf. Because we would never, none of us have got any interest at all in running around and killing anybody. There's no interest. We want to do this thing peacefully, and we can do it peacefully. I've got zero interest in running around killing human beings. I really have. So,
sorry, so are we net contributors then to the rest of the country? As
we have been in the past, but not last year wasn't one of the years, but in the past we've contributed like 3 and 5% more, a third sometimes.
And last year we were it was the other way around.
We were on level.
We were par.
We were par last year. In a bad year, we were par. Normally, we give money to them, and they then go and spend it in the Eastern Cape and other places, or don't spend it at all, or spend it in Dubai. I don't know. Possibly it's possible. Okay, but we don't see it. But last year was an unusual year. So in a bad year, we still, it's 100 billion that they get, and they spend on our behalf of our money.
Okay. So after this, they're going to be 100 billion short, as you said.
Yeah.
Okay.
But and the big negotiations. All right. So from a military point of view, if you want to come and occupy a country, a place like us with 7 million people, you need about one well-trained troop for 25 people. That's what you need. That translates into 280,000 troops. If you want to, if they even think of doing that sort of thing, we have 70,000 very badly trained troops. So there's probably 50,000 spares. So they've got 15%. If they even thought of that idea, I don't even think they'll even consider that idea. The other negotiating thing we have is that the country has a 400 billion deficit. We have our debt is 400 billion. It's 400 billion. It's growing at it's 4,000 billion. It's 4,000 billion. So I get like Jacob Zuma every now and again. Okay, this 4,000 billion is what we have. What is our national debt right at the moment? And it's growing at 300 billion a year. So we're spending 300 billion more than we're getting in. So that's going, by the time we come to negotiate, that's going to be close on 5,000 billion is what is our national debt. So the biggest single thing that the ANC wants us to do if we leave is they want us to take a portion of that debt.
Yeah.
And it's up to, and in my own personal view, it's worth our while to take our share of that debt. Let's have a negotiated thing. So I cannot see. In fact, you've seen it. I don't know if any of you watched the debates on this issue in social media. But I mean, Ibrahim Rasool doesn't even try and defend the ANC anymore. He was the previous premier of the Western Cape. He says, if you want to vote ANC, don't vote ANC. I mean, that's his public thing. Cameron Dugmore started in saying, no, we're never going to have this independent Cape on these actual issues. Now they've started to move because they know they're in a cleft stick. Everybody says to them, well, why shouldn't we want to be independent? You do such a lousy job running the rest of the country. Why shouldn't we want to run it ourselves? And he has started to move. Now he's the Western Cape leader of the ANC. He's saying, well, I'll tell you what, we won't give you independence. We also won't give you any devolved powers. But let's talk about it. So they've started to move already, knowing that this is a big issue that's coming up. So, and soon enough it's going to be. I tell you what, let's talk about. We don't like the idea of independence, but how about us talking about national debt? And how do we compensate on these things? We just have to win this referendum. That's what we have to do. That is the single big, and it's coming anyway. This referendum is coming anyway now.
So what you're saying is that if we win the referendum, then that 100 billion is purely spent in the Western Cape. Okay.
Yeah.
So does that also mean that the Western Cape will have to obviously run our own municipalities? But what about power? Are we still part of the national power grid? What about hospitals, as was mentioned earlier? Education we've spoken about. Things like other parastatals, Transnet, Telkom. How does that work? Do we control our own system, or are we still part of the national system?
Well, I think that the one issue that's going to be an issue is power. Okay, because we've got Kubo, we don't have enough power in the Western Cape as it stands at the moment, even though we are growing power at the moment. We might very well have to build another Koeberg. It's a possibility. But we see this as a negotiated solution. If we do this in the right way, it will be a negotiated solution. They want us, if Eskom gets some of this stuff right, it'll want to sell power to us. If they don't want to do it, we must build another nuclear power station. Because that's the solution. And all the other things will be, we're an independent country, but we're interdependent with South Africa. As France is with Germany, they're all independent. The railways go across the borders.
There'll be no borders. Well, there are borders.
Okay, we'll come to the borders now.
Yeah.
Okay, so the borders are an issue. So from an ANC point of view, I have absolutely no doubt, none of us have any doubt. If we do this thing peacefully, it's much more powerful to do it peacefully. Historically, if you look at the academic studies on peaceful as against sort of armed revolutions, peace is 3 times more successful than any armed thing. So we have absolutely no idea, no even thought of raising any sort of surrogate army or anything like that. It's going to be done just by peaceful resistance. Gandhi did it. He took the whole of India independent by doing that. You just got to be peaceful about it. I mean, just peacefully resist, that's all, if that's the issue. It's going to be a tough negotiation, there's no doubt.
And who's going to be the chief negotiator?
Well, we've got some good people, but none of us, I don't think. We're an advocacy group. We're trying to persuade other political parties. Corne Mulder, I mean, we've done a lot. Well, I'll tell you what the CIA has done in the 2.5 years that we've been around. But, so let's go to borders. Borders are an issue. I mean, our borders are, they are just beyond Pretoria. There's a border system down here somewhere, up in the crags in there somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then it goes up the west coast. Lowcross, okay. So that's that, and those will be the borders, because we know the voting patterns of those people. There'll probably be some negotiations on the borders of that. But these are not defendable borders. I mean, you can have a border post on every road, on every railway line, and all that kind of stuff. Let's see if we can run into the bush. But what you can do, and other countries have done it successfully, Australia being one of them, is that you can catch anybody who comes in. Because at some stage or other they've got to get a job, so they need to have the right papers to get a job. Number 2, they might want to go to hospital. Where's your papers for being in the country? You want to get a passport, you want to travel, you want an ID, you're going to drive a car, so you've got to have all these IDs. These can all be done electronically. They're not complicated to do electronically. And so we have to then make, and that's the tough part that we'll have to make a decision on, as we have to make it unattractive for people to come back.
Because if you create an ideological situation, other people would want to come in.
Absolutely, with devolution as well.
Well, and how, that's the big thing, how do you prevent that? Because ultimately, the sort of the shacks and the unemployed are just going to increase, and crime is going to increase.
Absolutely.
That's a big issue.
Yeah, it's a big issue in the whole country anyway. Whatever way we go.
Yeah.
Whatever way we go, we're going to have that problem. So you either must let them come in, as they're doing at the moment, and they come in at maybe, if we go the devolved power, you're going to end up with 200,000 people a year coming in. So you've got to make a tough choice. And this tough choice, the Australian method is, and Australia's got a similar problem to us. They've got this huge border. It's a sea border, but it doesn't make it that much different these days. And they also know there's, I don't know, 10,000 kilometers of border that they have. But anybody who's, eventually they will be caught once they're in. Because they're battle to make a living. They can't use a bank. They can't, all these things that you can use to pick up people. They then send them back to an island outside of there. And we've got lots of places up in the Northern Cape. We're going to send people there. We've just got to make it unattractive for them to come back. It's the only way we've got to do it. But we've got to be tough. This is, unfortunately, it's in our own long-term interest. We have to be tough on this particular issue. Because we're not going to build a wall right around the country. It's not going to happen. Okay. So anybody not on board on the idea of us pursuing the idea of independence, creating this Singapore? Not on board.
Not on board.
No, okay. No, I understand.
It's not going to work.
Okay.
It's not going to work.
Why? Why did you say that?
Brexit, look what happened to England with Brexit.
Yeah.
Probably different politically.
Sure.
Scotland wants independence.
Yeah.
What can Scotland do?
Yeah.
You're going to have a free electoral system, I think, in the
Sure.
Western Cape. You'll have the ANC voting, coming in and voting against it, and every time you're going to be at logins. Why don't we use the Western Cape as an example, as it is now, for the rest of the country? Don't divorce yourself from the rest of the country.
Okay.
Let's be part of it. Let's teach them what we're doing. Don't break it down. Don't divorce yourself.
No, understand. And
And I think that's the opportunity.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
before we go the route you want to go,
yeah.
which I admire you for doing it, but I think we can teach them rather.
And that is a possibility. That is definitely a possibility. And that's what the DA want to do.
So can I just carry on?
Sure.
We are seen as a white people right now in the Western Cape. Say what you like about the colours and the blacks.
Yeah.
Sorry to say, we are seen as white. It's a wealthy, it's a wealthy province.
Yeah.
What chance do the other people have? You will have, as this gentleman said, 1.5 million people coming through 10 years. They're not going to vote for us. Come on.
We understand that. We understand that. So we've got to stop them coming in. That's what we've got to do. If you want to keep the ideology of what we have here, you have got to stop the people coming in. If you don't do it, and that's what any other solution is going to do, is you're going to end up with this problem. Now you've got to convince people, for being socialist and black nationalists, you've got to convince them to being very different. That's like changing people's religion. It's a very, very, very complex thing to do. If you ever try to change anybody's religion, or change anybody's vote, generally speaking, it's very difficult indeed. I don't see, there's a chance, it happens generation, it doesn't happen, I haven't changed my vote probably since I was young, but maybe the last election I voted differently. But I've got an ideological difference on certain issues. But to change people's votes, never, on the fringes only, it changes only through generations. So the next generation you can talk to, but even then, they're still suspicious of that. Our guys who go out in the Khayelitsha and things, they say that, you know, they understand all the other things, but they are very, very, and I agree with you, very, very suspicious of us.
Can I just one more question?
Sure.
Rasool and Cameron Dugmore,
Yeah.
if they're on board with you,
No, they're not on board with us, not at all.
okay, but they
Yeah.
see the point. They see that
Yeah.
the ANC as it was is no longer as it's such.
I wouldn't say, sorry, just to stop, I wouldn't say Cameron Dugmore is there, and I wouldn't say that Rasool definitely understands the situation.
So let's say, can't those people go back to the ANC and work within them, within the organisation? Not for the Western Cape, for the whole country.
They've been doing this for 30 years, spectacularly unsuccessful. Why do we think there will be any change at all?
What I'm saying, those particular guys who see the faults of the ANC, who you say are seeing that they would come on board with you, are they not the guys you need to go and talk to central government?
Well, I think if he's talking to you, the way he's talking to you, he's given up with up north.
No, Rasool on his debates doesn't want to defend the ANC. He doesn't take further than that. He doesn't want to defend the ANC. What's happened to Cameron Dugmore is that he's been on a number of these discussions, and he's lost the debate each time, because everybody just comes back to you and says, you guys are so useless. What the hell are we sitting here with you? And I understand your thing. I just think it's going to take too long. If you go back to Zimbabwe, I've got people who go back to Zimbabwe quite regularly. They understand the situation now. They want, it to be reverted back, but it's too late. And exactly the same thing is going to happen to us. If we don't do it now, it's going to be too late. So we have a very short time to do it.
Yeah.
I think you're being conservative about the inflows into the Cape. But
That's what the DA tells us.
No doubt with fuel prices increasing
And
the
the water
property that's increasing,
Yeah, sure.
that there's going to be an inflow into the Cape like we've never seen.
Yeah. And I understand that the idea that it might be a white thing, but I've got people like Sinclair. Sinclair used to be a lecturer. He used to write speeches for the ANC in KZN, for the premier of the KZN. He's 32 or something, and he's a lecturer in constitutional law. He's moving to the Western Cape. He understands exactly what we are doing. His mother's from Xhosa, I think his father's a Zulu. Those guys are beginning to understand the need to do this. Because they say, if you don't do it now, you're going to have an ANC 2.0 here. Maybe that's the thing with the younger people. All of us, not me, but my kids don't understand. So that we have to do this thing now. We've got this wonderful crossing of things. I'll just go back to it. The numbers are right still for us. We're all open to suggestions at the moment, which we haven't been for a long time. You know, at the beginning of lockdown, everybody thought Summer Ramaphosa was going to come and change all for us, and that's all crashed on the rocks now. And we have this huge opportunity to really build this thing with these great things. But you know, if Amazon's gone to Gali or wherever it is, then probably going to find it difficult to come back here.
I think that conceptually,
Yes.
it's a great idea.
Okay.
I don't think that anybody would be against it,
Okay.
without a doubt. I think it's fantastic. But if you think about in the short, what's it now, 28 years that the ANC's been in power, with BEE and everybody on the gravy train, they are going to be your biggest nightmare when it comes to this. If you just consider the amount of time that courts are taking to make basic arrests and sentences of these people. I mean, you take Zuma, and you just carry on and on.
No,
The
sure.
Constitutional Court, where this will all land up. I mean, it's going to take, they'll just delay it and delay it and delay it. There are ways and means that,
doing that,
I think it's a good idea, but, you know, how do you get over that?
And I understand it, and it's an important issue. We so often come up, can you do it within the Constitution? It's got nothing to do with the Constitution. The only thing it has to do with the Constitution. Remember, we're divorcing the country. You don't go to your if you're a man going to get divorced, you don't go to your wife's attorney and say, look, how do I do this thing? You go to international law. International law says you've got to do these steps. You've got to do these steps. We basically only have to win the referendum. That's all this is about now. If we win the referendum, the rest is going to be negotiation. And the ANC might not even be power by then. That's the possibility. There are three options that we sit with. The one is the ANC is not in power, and the DA and some of the group are in power. That'd be much easier for us, which is the DA has talked to us many times on that. Number two is the ANC is in power in some sort of coalition, or they seize power. That is a possibility still. I think it's unlikely, but it's still a possibility. There's a whole lot of guys. You go to Joburg and let's talk about these people who are 61 who've been stealing for a long time. They all face time in jail now. So there could be that issue. Under those conditions, we think that the DA would then revert to our thing. And they've actually mentioned to us a number of times. It's plan B for them, from their point of view. But so we've got this, we might have to deal with the ANC, but the ANC is not going to come in here and march in here and say to you guys, forget it. We do not have to get that permission.
You're saying legally it's doable.
What's that? Legally it's doable, yeah, as long as we follow the steps. We've got to follow the steps. Scotland's follow the steps. Spain is a different situation completely.
Neil.
They don't have the right. They don't have the right to secede instead. It's in their constitution, so they cannot secede. Yeah, we don't have that problem.
How are you going to control people coming in or people wanting to come and live in the Western Cape?
Well, I actually think
If we got the independence,
No, I
how
understand.
do you
control.
yeah,
Well,
because we've only got a certain amount of resources.
you're asking my personal opinion on one aspect. I think we want people to come into the Western Cape, but we want the right people to come into the Western Cape.
So how are you going to beat that?
Well, like any other country does, is that they select. You have a selection policy. There are lots of people. I mean, I've got tenants. I've got Nigerian tenants. I mean, they're creative people. I've got Ugandan tenants. I've got all those sort of people, really creative people. Africa's full of those people. There might not be all 2,000 million of them, but there are 50 million to maybe 100 million who are really creative. And those people can really, if we choose the right ones, can really help us. Firstly, to go back into Africa. I'm doing that at the moment, working in Nigeria. Because I have a Nigerian tenant, and he talks to me and says, these are the guys in Nigeria you must talk to and do these sort of things. If it wasn't for him, I couldn't do that.
Sounds like you're part of the problem.
I'm part of the solution when it comes to that. Because those guys actually understand what we're offering here. They really understand what we're offering here.
Sorry, Neil.
Yeah.
I think we've got some questions.
Sorry, I'm at the end there. I've answered some. Okay, right, can I come down here?
So just a quick question.
Yes, please.
So you've obviously been doing this for a while, right?
Sure.
So when are we getting our independence from your perspective? When do you reckon this is actually going to happen?
Okay,
I mean, obviously you advocacy.
The legacy group, yeah.
And you're putting it together, but when are we going to get it?
Okay, so
is it next year? Is it
No, it
2
won't be
years?
like that.
5 years? When are we becoming independent?
Okay.
And what is the criteria in your opinion? Because My mother-in-law lives in, where's she?
Yeah.
And my father's in Piet Retief, actually. So
Okay, so they get in.
and that's how I work it all out. I hate these people to be so.
The wrong place.
Because the next thing I'm going to have to go through passport and thing, and they have no value to add.
No, I understand that, okay. So let me,
They're going to be buggered there, they're not going to have 100 billion, 100 billion's gone.
No, I
And they're going to be parking
understand.
off Peter's wrist, scratching their noses.
well, look, the referendum is going to be a big issue. Okay, so the referendum we expect to be around about the end of next year. Okay, sorry. So I'm going to stand up here. So you can just, the question is if you've got people outside of the country, outside of the Western Cape, who want to come in here. I've got a situation. My daughter's in Hoedspruit, so they've got to be registered. You've got to be registered to vote. Now, if you take the Scottish thing, which is probably the cleanest one that's happened, is if you were English and living in Scotland and registered to vote in Scotland, you could vote in the Scottish referendum. If you were Scottish and you were living in England and registered to vote in England, you could not vote on Scottish independence.
So if your daughter's in Hoedspruit, can she vote?
She would have to register but prior, when the registration comes, she would have to register here to make it automatic. Simple as that. That's the right way to do it. Look, we're Africa, so it's a bit grey, eh? Things get grey. Sorry, just do this one quickly first.
Also remember that we are South Africans.
Yeah.
And this is going to be, I think, quite an issue for people, because...
You won't be South Africans anymore.
Yeah.
No, it's true, very true. You've got to make a choice.
I don't want to immigrate
What, immigrate from?
from this little pocket to be a South African again.
Well, that's, and as I said, it's a free choice. We're just debating the choices and saying, but there are consequences to those choices. And that's what you've got to do, and say, look, we understand that. The Cape hasn't been independent since 1910. It was independent in 1910. I don't know if you know that. Okay? So it was a different Cape, but it still was there. So there are those practical things, and that's why some people will find that too difficult to do. But there are consequences to those decisions, that you are going to end up in a situation that is very different from what you have now. This is a nice bubble here. I see it, because Cape Town's another bubble. And, but we've got to take these things head on, in my view. And maybe some people don't feel it's too much of a step. But those who do, we then need to go on to the next things. Okay, so can I go on to the steps we have to do?
Sorry, Neil.
Yes.
What about trade, okay? Because if we all become independent,
Yeah.
what about the landlocked part of South Africa then? How are you going to address trade of goods going up and down?
Okay, well, there shouldn't be, unless...
Well, the little Brits have never had a huge problem with this.
Yeah, but it's an island. Okay, so, I mean, they would use Durban Port, or... They would come through. I mean, that's why we want a negotiated solution. With the free trade, I mean, we might come up with a completely free trade arrangement like the EU has. But we just have to stop the numbers. We have to stop the numbers, and we have to stop the ideology changing the Western Cape.
You're talking about the Western Cape, not the Cape.
Talking about the Western Cape. We only can deal with the Western Cape because the old Cape was Northern Cape and a lot of the Eastern Cape. Well, not all of the Eastern Cape, but some of the Eastern Cape. So there's no reason. That's why we want a negotiated solution. I mean, the SADC is trying to have a free trade arrangement. Why shouldn't we put part of that? That's part of our negotiation. We've got rail lines going, we've got rivers transgressing. So it's not going to be, it's just we have to control those numbers. If we're going to solve the problems in the Western Cape in one generation, this is the only option.
You know,
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing because Corner Mulder addressed this.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if you
Yeah, well, we organize that, yes.
It was
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah, very
on his take and an extraordinarily learned man.
Very much so.
In this situation. And from what I understood from him, we're kind of building bridges before we've actually found rivers here, I think, in a lot of the discussion.
the primary issue that he stipulated was this referendum. So the referendum absolutely can be legally called by the Premier. Of course, he didn't call it. He has to win it. You get one shot. You have to win it. If you call it and lose it, it's all over. So
I beg your pardon, do you mind if we all participate in this discussion?
Yeah, no, sure, good idea. Yeah, let me try. Okay, so can I just repeat your question again? No, just when you finish your question, can I repeat it for Diana?
So I think just for the younger folks downstairs there this is a discussion really about a referendum. Getting over the line with the referendum. The rest will follow.
Yeah.
I think to try and build bridges beyond the referendum at this point in time is premature.
Yeah.
Those things are solvable. They've been solved in the past, as you've said, by many other countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
The hurdle to get over is the referendum.
For sure.
And that's what we have to focus on. So that's a one shot. You get that wrong, it's all over. By the singing and
very difficult the second one, yeah.
A very vindictive response to that as well in the years to come. So, I think for all of us, looking at the country Sydney as it is now and the past number of years that have led up to where we are now, I think the case has pretty much lost. I don't think if anybody thinks that it's solvable, then nationally in any way, I think that might be ambitious. Ambitious. So the only way to do this, if we would like to live in the way that we've lived in the past or want to live in the future for our children too, is to get an independent Cape.
Sure.
And the only way we can do that is to get the referendum right. So I think all the energy has to be spent right there.
On the referendum, absolutely.
100%. And not even talk about anything else, because everything else will follow that. And of course there can be pressures of bees to honey. That's going to exist. It happens everywhere. The Principality of Monaco is the same as that.
Absolutely.
But they manage to control it. So, for what I understand Corner was trying to get at there, was say, guys, this is where we